It's time for real talk about Wind and Truth. And I wonder, will you, viewers, agree with our takes? Heck, will we agree with each other?
Probably not.
Doubtful.
Hi there! Welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, the show where father and son sit down and talk today about a singular fantasy book. I'm the son of that equation, Zach.
And I'm the father, Jim. Thanks for joining us as we talk about Wind and Truth. Book 5 of the Stormlight Archive. We're going to give full spoils here in this episode. We're going to talk what we liked. We're going to talk what we didn't. We're going to talk what other people didn't like and what do we think of those opinions. And we're happy to talk with any of our Patreon supporters who can join us today. I see Jordo is in the chat. What's up, Jordo? Good to have you with us. And we will be taking our live chat comments and taking that into account as we talk about things here today. So any of them who are able to join us get to be part of the episode. So, Wind and Truth, man.
Wind and Truth.
Let's give a few just facts before we dive in. It came out almost a month ago to the day of when we're recording. So that was back on December 6th. It's definitely a bestseller. It debuted at number 1 on both the New York Times and USA Today bestsellers lists.
I'm so shocked.
And it reached number 1 on the Sunday Times bestseller list in the United Kingdom, but it didn't stick around there very long. Actually, I think my notes are wrong there. I don't think it hit number 1 there. I think it only made it up to number 4.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I swear I looked that up, and I don't think it was supposed to say number 1 there. Anyways, right now, 4 weeks after its release, it's still number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list. And I'm like, just 4 weeks, it's already dropped to number 5.
That doesn't shock me for a couple of reasons.
Well, we'll come back to that, why you are not shocked, but more dramatically on the USA Today bestseller list, it's down to number 20 already.
Mm-hmm.
It's not staying up. Wind and Truth is 13th right now on Audible's bestseller chart, which is, driven by people using their service to listen. That's for all books that they have. For just fantasy and science fiction, it's number 5 on the Audible right now. Now, I noted Fourth Wing, the romantasy novel by Rebecca Yarros that came out in September, is ahead of Wind and Truth on both the USA Today and the New York Times lists. Also on that Audible sci-fi and fantasy one, where it's number 5. All 4 of the things ahead of it are from that series. From I forget the whole name, but Iron and Flame, Fourth
There's
Wing.
only 3 books, and one of them's not out yet.
Right. The pre-order is ahead of Wind and Truth. But also they have another version of the second book of Fourth Wing, a more actor and sound stuff. So you can order it 2 different ways, and both of those are ahead of it.
So, version or something.
Apparently, there's a crazy wide audience for that romantasy novel, and you've read.
I have not yet, but it does appeal both to people who enjoy fantasy and to those who haven't necessarily but are just getting into it. It's very much a gateway fantasy book, especially for people who were already kind of romance readers or something in that genre.
Now, Sanderson's books of the Cosmere used to be gateway into fantasy, but we're going to talk about that because especially with Wind and Truth, I think we're seeing a shift here. But that's getting ahead of myself. I just want to remind people before we really talk turkey now, this is full spoil. Again, if you have not read Wind and Truth, you should not be here.
Probably not.
I mean, unless you are just wholesale committed to never read that trash. Okay, stick around if that's how you feel.
Super committed to not caring about getting huge spoils revealed.
Okay. So, Zach, let's start off our discussion by just give us briefly your overall take on the book, like what you might have told Goodreads if you had a Goodreads account. What's your basic and give it a rating out of 5 stars.
So I really enjoyed this book. There was a lot in there, both in content and page count, and I very much enjoyed diving back into this world. I don't necessarily think it was the strongest installment in the series, but it was still something that I quite enjoyed. And I think most people who did enjoy the series but had serious issues with this book have probably run into a problem of their expectations not being met and getting something else instead.
Interesting.
I, however, still very much enjoyed it, and I gave it 5 stars.
It
was a
seen
5-star
many
for me.
5-star ratings. So, okay. For me, each of the Stormlight Archive books got better as I went. Even my first time through, I felt more strongly the second time through, but they each, and I know I'm an outlier on that. Rhythm of War was my favorite of the first 4. Most people, that's not the case. Rhythm of War and Oathbringer were like neck and neck for me, but I really kind of liked Rhythm of War a little bit more because it progressed the story farther, and I'm always here for the story. But I can't say the same about Wind and Truth.
I think
it entertained me.
So wrong.
I got a lot out of it, but it didn't surpass Rhythm of War or Oathbringer for me. And maybe I'd feel better about it the second time through, but I have no desire right now to read it a second time. Not yet, at least. For me, though, it's still a 4-star. I did enjoy the story. There are parts of it that I could have done without, but most of it was answering questions for me. I loved a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today, all the backstory we got, and, answering puzzle pieces that were missing, was great. But it didn't knock it out of the park like I would have hoped to conclude the first arc.
I think a lot of people could be let down by what the big concluding the first arc and ultimately Dalinar's journey in this book. I think there's a lot to be said of people being potentially disappointed in that. That being said, all of my eggs were not in the Dalinar basket. I wasn't necessarily into this needs to be the biggest final confrontation. I'm like, no, it's halfway through the series. Yeah, it's the end of the first arc. But in many ways, I thought this actually turned into a book that was a setup book. This is setting up
definitely a lot
the
of that.
next half.
Which
and
he doesn't
other
plan
series
to start until 2031.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
We'll get to talking about that and to what that means in terms of other Cosmere things. Because yes and no, but we'll get there.
So Jordo with us here, his thoughts on I'm going to toss in here. He agreed with you on, people with their expectations. You got to manage that a little bit. But his first read, we'll translate that to a 3.5, 7 of 10. But he's expecting it may change when he gets to it.
Hopefully it doesn't change down. That would suck.
And then his other rankings of the first 4.
I don't think that's star ranking. I think that's order.
So let's chime in now on some of the specific aspects of the book. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, let's get in here.
So let's talk first about the narrative structure that as we had predicted, we did a prediction episode. As our prediction was that this would be the 10 days. And then a little bit of wrap up at the end. But that was the primary part of the story, is we got it a day at a time, what was happening. How'd that work for you? What are your thoughts?
I enjoyed it in the extent of, if I'm trying to get through this book, where am I breaking up these chunks? I thought they worked as pretty good bite-sized chunks of read like a day kind of thing. It worked out pretty well. That being said, I can understand some people may be looking at it and going, some of the plot lines didn't really feel like they had much that happened in this day or had much that happened in this day. So why did we stop in with them? And I'm like, because it was still what was going on. It was that day. We're getting through it. We didn't spend as much time, but we did stop in with them. There was a certain element of seeing the mundane nature of life in these 10 days, even through the epic things, that I found to be almost refreshing, simply because far too often we focus on the big things, what's happening, the action in fantasy. And it was nice to see a step back sometimes and go, hey, even with this conflict looming, they still have to get through the boring parts of the days.
Now that's a take. That's a perspective. I would lean in a little bit towards what I've seen other people also having a little criticism and concern about, that the early days, there's not enough happening yet. And yet he was giving a fairly equal amount of time to each day. So there's pacing issues for me. I was getting a little bored early on. I felt he was having to fill space on some things and getting a little too much exposition, too much mundanity, to use the word you'd said, and it didn't work for me. Once we got to about halfway through the book, maybe a third of the way through the book, it starts picking up, and I was much more interested. It wasn't just all about action, but it was all about important. Now it's important again. We had stuff early on, it just wasn't important to me at all.
And I think, to me, the difference in what we were looking for in that, especially in the first half of the book, was what we're reviewing as important. There were plenty of things that didn't necessarily feel plot important, but did feel important to that person, important to who they were. And I felt like were, if not big character moments to stop in with this character, see who they are, how they are, what they're thinking. And so, as someone who I was approaching it and reading it from a kind of character-driven spot, I liked it.
Jordo makes some good points here, one being that every one of these Stormlight Archive books, and he says every single Sanderson book, maybe, but
I
definitely
think to a certain extent, let's go further. Every single epic fantasy book, like it happens.
Oh, not every.
Pretty much.
Certainly with these Stormlight Archive books, they start slow. It was an issue I had with the Way of Kings. It took forever to get going, okay? But there was also so much world building that had to be done. So, okay, fine. But this one, it seemed to me unnecessarily slow. When we only have 10 days till an epic challenge, it could have been a heightened issue more for me. But he also comments that 10-day format led to some of the things that happened in the story being maybe artificial, that we didn't build up to it enough, or what they were able to pull off was too cheap, wasn't earned, because we just have to squeeze it into 10 days. And I think we'll talk about that as we talk on some of the other
elements here. We'll get more into that.
Those are good points, valid points. Overall, I was happy to have the 10 days and give it to us. Could he have done it a little different, a little better? Well, we can nitpick authors to death.
Absolutely.
But it definitely got to some big events. And let's talk more about some of these other events and character growth journeys that we saw in just 10 days. How about Szeth? This is a book that's a massive Szeth book.
Szeth's son's on Villano. We get some history, some backstory. We get his childhood.
We finally get that full backstory. He's been a mystery, kind of a blank slate before he came on the scene, as has been Shinovar. Thank you, Shinovar. I'm like, that's coming out of my mouth wrong. I know that's wrong.
Have actually been like there, even though we've seen glimpses, we didn't really see the people or the culture from the inside.
So we finally get so much of Shinovar. We get why he ended up truthless. I loved that.
So much of his backstory and reading through it, every time I hit one of those chapters, almost every time it was breaking my heart a little.
Yeah.
It was like, I get your plight and it hurts to see. I don't fully understand because I don't have the same driving need for a black and white solution that he so clearly does.
Mm-hmm.
But it hurts. And the powerful moments of his dad making the choice to be like, no, we're going with you, and sticking with that. And it was a very grounded in humanity path for someone who seemed so lost for so long.
Yeah. This whole series has definitely dwelt on a lot of characters who are neurodivergent. Mm-hmm. And we see very much so Szeth is another one of those characters. That's where he is. He has no gray. Everything has to be true or not. And, to get to a point where I'm not capable. I have to have someone else tell me what is true and what to do. Yeah, rough all the way from the beginning. But it helped us to understand now. Why did he end up truthless? Where is this all about? What was going on? And to see, that he was right, but he wasn't right when he was younger. That was a good twist, to understand that. Now, what he had to do when he goes back and this whole plot line in Shinovar, that didn't all entirely make a lot of sense to me.
Well, to me, it didn't make a whole lot of sense until the end when we find out how and why he was wrong at so long ago.
Yeah.
Because he's going through this journey, and it's clearly a path that is being set in front of him by Ishar, and it's like, why am I jumping through these hoops? What is this? Okay, we'll play your game to get some answers. And finding out, no, I'm not cleansing it of an unmade. It's been Ishar the whole time. And Agatha all along, you know?
But see, that's part of the issue I have with this, though. Why would Ishar allow him to think he's just an unmade? He could have fixed that right at the beginning and didn't. Why? The whole issue of him going off like that and leading a rebellion and trying to get the truth out is all because Ishar didn't reveal himself fully like he'd done to everyone else. What the heck?
One, Ishar did it on purpose. He's a dick. Two, it's less that he's a dick and more that he's wrong, he's misguided. And one thing I loved seeing the emphasis of in this book is that the heralds are insane.
Flawed.
They have their issues. We've been dealing with trauma and how war affects people, damages people for so long through so many of these books, but often we haven't really focused on the heralds in that beyond the fact of, oh, they're broken. But seeing, no. Even the functioning ones are very broken because they've been through so much, so many times.
Yeah. Jordo adds into that. Definitely. You know, a lot of these choices he made in childhood caused trauma. It happened again and again on repeat. And then, you know, he ends up truthless. And then he comes back and has to deal with it again going home. But something that I caught as an implication here, I think it was even more than an implication perhaps, is Ishar was good with Szeth being made truthless.
He wanted it to happen.
So that he could go elsewhere, become this incredible killing machine, this so skilled in a way that he could not possibly get just staying in Shinovar because he wants him to become a herald.
He had this idea of what was needed for a herald and was grooming him his whole life for it.
To become an unstoppable herald.
There really wasn't a whole lot of deviation from that path.
Now, of course, we learn here in the book why Ishar, I mean, they've all been struggling thousands of years, going back to Braze and coming back and going back and coming back. You know, it's been hard for all of them. But he's doubly insane because he tapped into a pool of odium.
Oh, let's double down on that. He also took more of the other heralds' pain when they were backing away, kind of recreants and stuff. That's a hard word for me to say. Wow. So he's taken extra pain and trauma. Then he also takes the extra emotions and the corruption of some odium power. Dude's doing a lot, but he is not in control.
Now, did I also catch, though, in here that as he was taking their pain, some of what he had from odium was oozing back out? So he's impacting.
He's corrupting them a little bit by doing that. Yeah.
That was. Let's shift over to, or just add to this, Kaladin then.
Yes.
So Kaladin's been given the task to go with Szeth to reach out to Ishar, but also to try to help Szeth, because Kaladin now is the first world therapist. That was a funny line in the book. Well, who are you? I'm his therapist. What is that? I have no idea.
I don't know. Wit told me that's what it's going to be called, but I don't know.
Funny. But he's figured out a way of basically helping people by just talking to them about their problems. Okay, that's a little cheap. There's more to therapy than what we see here in the book. And then over just a few days, they have a breakthrough with Szeth, which leads to then, because of music on the wind, a breakthrough with Nail and a breakthrough with Ishar. Did that seem a little... Come on.
I think it seems cheap if you say, A, those were actual breakthroughs and fixes. It's like, no, none of these people were fixed. No. And I don't think the story says that. I also don't think that it's, oh, he said some words, he said something. No. If you look and pay attention, it's more important usually that he listened. And
he did his greatest therapy by playing the flute and by cooking stew.
And we ultimately kind of get to see and show and demonstrate that it's less Kaladin helping by going and telling people how they need to fix themselves or by fixing people, but usually by being there with people to let them kind of have moments where they can remember that it's not necessarily as bad as they are. These moments of clarity on a much larger journey. We haven't fixed either Herald. Szeth isn't fixed, but he gets to have a moment where he gets to maybe take a step to think for himself. He gets a breakthrough moment, sure, but also in that moment recognizes his journey's not done. He ascends to the fifth ideal and then renounces it because he says, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, that was something where, I'm not sure I'm on board with how easy Sanderson made that suddenly. That we can let's just renounce our oaths for a reason. Because we see it twice. We see Szeth do it, but we also see Sigzil do it.
We see it 3 times.
What was the third time?
Dalinar.
Oh, that's right. So it's like, oh, we just have this thing we can do now. And it's like, that was maybe a little overused.
Well, on the one hand, maybe. On the other hand, I think what it needs to be clear, and because you feel it was overused, maybe it got lost. But Sigzil's chapter really showed it and meant it, was that you needed to mean it. Mm-hmm. And that's hard, especially when you've been on this journey going towards this, making these oaths, binding this power. But we saw in history, hundreds of people did it. So clearly it's not something that can't be done. But there are reasons and ramifications of why it wouldn't be, usually.
Yeah, but
it's not. And we've been learning over and over that what we thought was wrong in the past. It's not that, they were so shocked that they abandoned their things. No, they learned and said, we need to make the conscious choice to step away.
In those past ones, though, we got the impression that it was a mutual choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what's happening in either of these 3 cases. Although the Stormfather kind of gives his permission.
That one is a little bit more. Yeah.
Okay. But it seemed to be treating the oaths cheaply. Okay. You earn these oaths. You work up to them. You become these oaths. And then just to casually say, I renounce my oaths. Now, you still believe those things. You still are those things. That seemed too
and that's
simple.
The thing. You're saying they have to say it casually. Everyone who did it did do it in a big and emotive moment. It wasn't that they overstew, decided, I'm just going to renounce my oaths. They did it in a dire effort of one reason or another. I don't think we're going to see a mass surge of people who suddenly are renouncing their oaths. But the fact that it happened in a couple of different places isn't crazy to me. Do I think maybe he locked himself into a specific path with at least Szeth's? Maybe.
Now, 2 other things with Kaladin here I really want us to talk about. One is that he suddenly is strong enough, mentally, fortitude-wise, to take on the darkness of others, to be able to overcome it. Because we have that huge moment right near the end where, Ishar says, feel what I have had, and boom, it all comes down, and they're all being taken out by it, and then Kaladin stands.
Yeah. I think you're framing that wrong again.
Okay, tell me how I'm framing it wrong.
Well, you said that he overcame it, that he did this. It's like, no, but pain tolerance is real, and what your bad day is someone else's Tuesday. But what their bad day is the worst thing in the world for you. And so it's not so much that Kaladin overcame or he's so much better or so much stronger, but just that he's been practicing for decades.
If not his whole life sucking.
Well, to a certain extent, he's been practicing at forcing himself to get up in spite of it. He didn't overcome it. It didn't go away, but he was able to take the next step, as Jordo's saying.
Okay.
He's not better for it, but he does have a little bit more practice knowing that he needs to take that step.
All right. I can accept that. Then what happens with Kaladin at the end? What are your thoughts?
I wasn't shocked at all. Mostly couple of big ticks for me. One, it very much screams this is Kaladin. This was what Kaladin's purpose and journey was. This is why he really was here. And then we go over, okay, he as a Windrunner, what's going to be his biggest motivation to protect people and do all this? How can he truly embody that? By stepping in and taking this spot as a herald for Szeth, helping others by helping reforge the Oath Pact, all of that. And then we go, let's see how far back we can foreshadow this. Which herald did we lose? Jezrien. Who was the Windrunner one? Like, we've got a new Honor Blade that does the same stuff the old Honor Blade did. It's not really rocket science. The pieces were there. Of all the various reveals, this one was satisfying. It wasn't surprising.
Jordo puts a comment here in the chat that matches a lot of the criticism I've seen about this, that for Kaladin to reach this point over just 10 days to now be the new herald didn't seem to have enough build. But I think you make valid points, Zach, that this has been a journey for Kaladin that I think really seriously gets its start in Oathbringer.
Yeah. If
and
anything,
moves up to making sense that it could be his destination.
If anything, 10 days was too long. The only thing Kaladin needed to realize in those 10 days, I'm not going to be Dalinar's champion. Everything else, he'd already done the work. He got there along the way, and his ascension to the fourth ideal in Rhythm of War was already him more or less making the step and the commitment to the next spot that he needed to, which he wasn't able to do back in Oathbringer, but could have and should have. And so it was really just a Kaladin walking into the circumstance that let him see, oh, this is where my journey has been going all along. I've been on the journey. I didn't know the destination, but it's about the journey before the destination anyways. But this is where it was going.
Okay. Ready to move to the next talking point?
Absolutely. Who we got? What we got?
Renarin and Rlain.
That felt a little forced.
Who are now a couple. Yeah.
I've got no issue with nowhere. I've got no issue with it. I can see how they're good for each other kind of thing. But it did seem like it came a little out of nowhere. We hadn't really seen interaction or time between them in a way that made sense before.
Yeah. And I mentioned this in my own separate review of the book. I felt that was a part that happened early in the book where he's taking too much time to try to explain all of this, and then bringing Drahe in and having a whole conversation with Renarin and being who you are and be authentic, and it doesn't matter what people think. And I'm like, move on, please. Okay, this is where he was feeling preachy to me.
I will say that interaction with Drahe hit me in my feels. That conversation felt really nice, and it was a moment of standing there for Renarin, showing he's still part of Bridge 4, and some of that was good. But I did feel like maybe he spent more time than he should have, but only because if we had had the building blocks in previous books, we wouldn't have needed that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it felt like something that it was too late for him to have gotten into this plot line. He should have started a book or two ago, but we're already at a point where it's like, okay, we need to get to this point now. So how do I illustrate to everyone that this makes sense? And it was a bit much.
Well, and he squeezed in backstory of Rlain, of how he was the one with his own people who never fit in, who was not valued as others, who never felt comfortable going into mate form. You know, all this stuff gets dumped on us in this book to make this new thing work. And I'm like,
I didn't hate getting more Rlain backstory because there have been some missing pieces. Do I wish we had gotten it in Rhythm of War when we were going, could Rlain be the new bondsmith with the sibling, and we were unsure about that? Do I wish we'd had those building blocks sooner? Absolutely. Okay. It's not that I think they're missing from the story, but you're right that it felt weird having it all there at the front of this book.
We've got a lot to talk about in the spiritual realm, so let's move on now to Dalinar, Navani, and eventually Gav, and their journey, their experiences in the spiritual realm. What are your thoughts about that part of the story? It takes a massive amount of the book.
Dalinar and Navani's journey to them as individuals, this was probably my least interested part of the books.
Wow.
Their personal character development within the spiritual realm.
But not the historical reveals.
No. And that's the difference
some of my
here.
Favorite.
Because I enjoyed seeing some of the reveals, seeing how things came to be, what's going on. That was really cool. Coming up to chapters from Tanavast that are in all caps now suddenly. All these things. Very cool. Liked seeing these. But it felt like we were getting them for plot reasons, not for character reasons. And so the Dalinar and Navani parts of it just kind of felt like they're here to be the observers so that we get to observe this. Which is fair, it's true, but it wasn't what I was looking for necessarily.
He needed information. I mean, that's the whole reason to be here. How can I defeat Odium or Odium's champion? And he's been given the hint. It's by knowing the past. You need to understand how things got the way they are and what the Stormfather doesn't want to tell you. So we get to see all that while they learn it. So that just didn't work for you.
It wasn't that it didn't work so much as what it felt like the focus wasn't there. So they're just, I need to step back and just say first, and this is where I might catch some hate. Dalinar's not my favorite character.
You've been on the record with that before.
And to a certain extent, I think Dalinar gets a lot of love in the fan community of people going like, oh, are you basic? Are you a Kaladin fan? And then people going, no, Dalinar's where it's really at. Did you see his journey? You can't have my pain. Come on. And I'm like, we've gotten to a point. No, Dalinar's the basic answer of your favorite character. He's the quote unquote protagonist of the big story in this first half. And he falls into, in this book, a little bit of main character syndrome of needing to be there and exist for the sake of the big story going forward, but therefore isn't necessarily my favorite.
Dalinar is not the most important story to follow in this book. It's definitely his main purpose is the vehicle by which we get to learn all the information we needed to know about the past. I completely agree with that. And that what he does with it at the end, we'll talk about that later. Now, you just wanted to lean in Dalinar and Navani, but the grandson is there.
Yeah.
Wow, that turns tragic.
Again, I liked that happening and was not surprised.
You weren't surprised, okay.
No, mostly because the moment they go in... So I was reading about the same pace as Brendan, who we've had on way long ago.
Yes.
And so we're texting back and forth a little bit about what's going on and some thoughts here and there. And I was like, wouldn't it be wild if like we don't even see him again this book maybe, but he comes back way older sometime later with different information?
Wow. When it happened,
was like the moment they went in, they hadn't found Gav in the spiritual realm yet. And I'm going, wouldn't that be wild?
When it happened at the end, and we'll talk about that a little later, but when it happened, I wasn't surprised at that point, but I didn't see it coming. But I'm like, oh, I see what you did there. Okay. It works for me. That's fine. But, we had the hints all along that his dad, he was hearing from his dad. No, he
wasn't. He was hearing from Odium. 100%.
Yeah. That made sense then, though.
And I never once thought it was Elokar. I'm sorry, Elokar.
No.
I wish I could believe in you, but you're dead. And you're actually dead.
Okay, also in the spiritual realm, we've got Shallan, Rlain, Renarin, and all their spren along for the journey. And their goal, of course, they're trying to stop. Well, they're trying to do two things. They're trying to find Ba Ado Mishram and stop Yaddle and Maraise from finding Ba Ado Mishram.
Yeah.
So there's a double agenda here. This was a fairly interesting element to the story for me. I enjoyed especially seeing Shallan dealing with this. The Renarin and Rlain stuff was not as critical to me. I mean, we get to see their decision at the end to free Ba Ado Mishram, and I think that was the right decision. I didn't have a problem with that choice. I'm like, yep, that makes sense. That is what you should do. Yes. But it was Shallan's stuff that was most captivating to me, and what we learn about Shallan here, which is the biggest revelation in this whole book.
I disagree it's the biggest revelation in the book, but only because it was such a huge fan theory that I was sitting here already going, did we not already know this? Because we technically didn't. We didn't. We had conjecture, and I was pretty sure. I'm like, yeah, her mom's a herald. She killed Tal Never Broke.
See, this is where I have a different experience because I have not paid any attention to all those fan theories. I have too much else to do to dive into the Copper Mind and hear what everyone's conjecturing. And no, I don't. So I've never heard anything like that.
I dove heavily in or came to it myself. It was a theory I had. I'm not going to sit on my high horse and say it was just me, because I do exist in spheres where I hear things. I don't live under a rock. Contrary to what people believe, you don't keep me in the basement.
Or in a closet under the stairs.
I have access to the internet. So I do see things that are potentially not from my origin, but this was one that I was like, yeah, this is just true.
In essence, one could say Shallan caused the desolation.
Oh, I'm pretty sure the book said Shallan caused the desolation.
Mom. And her mom goes back and breaks, and that, wow. I thought that was huge.
I'm really excited for at some point the heralds to all find that out, because they're all in the same place now and can talk and are gonna find out. Oh, Tal Never Broke. We've been assuming for the past few years that he finally did.
Nope, he's the super dude.
Well, I guess we made the right choice to leave him.
And we did learn here, going back in the history, he was the one that was different from the rest of them all along.
Oh, yeah.
He was chosen for his uniqueness. And then that they specifically screwed him over and made him be the one there because they genuinely believed he was capable. He could do this.
And that's another reason why, to me, Kaladin was such a good person to fill the position that was open, because he fills a lot of the same boxes that Tal did.
Okay.
And his reasonings for being a herald fit in that same slot.
All right. I like it.
Doing the job more or less so no one else has to.
Yeah. Iyatl being formless. I didn't see that coming.
No, that one was
I loved
enough of a surprise.
I loved it.
I enjoyed it. It was like, oh yeah, that does make sense.
I just kind of with formless.
I was down with going. She didn't necessarily deal with, especially because things can be so uncertain, and healing is a process as opposed to just an individual thing. And so it's like, well, maybe formless is around, and oh no, it's just her. I'm down with that. I'm good with that.
And then she does take out Mraize as well, so she has dealt with the Ghost Bloods on Roshar.
And there's still more to that.
We get that little bit in the epilogue, basically, where she's trapped at the moment in the cognitive realm and has communications with the Ghost Blood, with the higher up guy, starts with the T.
Thadakar?
Thank you, Thadakar.
You mean Kelsier?
Is he really?
Yeah. Lord of Scars?
Where do we learn that?
Thadakar's nickname is Lord of Scars. You know, the scars of this. We hear him described. It's the same description as we get in the Lost Metal, with the one spike through one of the eyes. It's the same reason why Wit talks about Thadakar and talking about deal with your own problems on your own planet, or I'll come kick your ass again.
So that's Kelsier, who's
Thadakar is 100% Kelsier, stuck.
I never knew that.
On Scadrial still.
All the revelations. Oh my. We're going to talk more about the Cosmere connections coming up here, but there's still some key elements here to talk about. We've got Jasnah's debate. Jordo's chiming in here. Ghost Blood's organization objectives on Roshar may have shifted.
For sure. Especially as there's still a certain level of, like, with that conversation, truce between Kelsier and Shallan, not between the Ghost Bloods and the Lightweavers. And that gets said and established. And we'll see what happens when time gets back together about 80 years from now.
Right. We've got in this book, the different sections that happen. So we had Kelsier and Szeth go to Shinovar. Jasnah goes to Thaylen City. Adolin goes to Azir. Dalinar and Navani and Shallan had stayed in the tower and then have their experiences. Let's go with Jasnah now for her experience there. She goes to help, and they figure out, I thought this was cool, they figured out, no, there's no additional army coming here. so we can now reallocate resources. But there was no army coming because Odium himself is going to come and try to win a debate to win this. And I have seen some people criticizing this element of the story as being cheap, and that the way the words, we just word Jasnah to death here, basically. And of course, they swing Thaylen City to Odium's way. I thought that was actually really well done.
I enjoyed it, especially because in a moment where Jasnah thinks she can step forward and finally prove herself in something that is different from her, she then instead gets crushed,
very humbled
in her own perceptions and what things are. And there's a certain amount of nice moment of going, yeah, you never were going to outthink the person who has full capacity. Like,
well, that's it.
God's
Jasnah's power,
have that.
Her persona, her image is all based on controlling the information. She has secrets, man. She has things that, if everybody knew, her facade would fall apart. And well, Odium knows it all. He's got omniscient God power going on here. So he can open up and unwrap all of those secrets and everything crumbles.
Well, and it was a great moment to show, to me, I didn't mind talk about various moral philosophies when we're talking utilitarianism and we're actually talking about it rather than illustrating the choices. I'm like, yeah, because the characters are actually thinking about and talking about it. Have you not paid attention to Jasnah's character? This is who she is.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see inside her head very often, so we haven't gotten this, but we're getting her POV chapters. This is who she is.
I think it's going to leave her as a character very changed, and probably in a good way.
I think so, especially as we're looking towards, hey, maybe pure utilitarianism is not the best moral philosophy to go off of.
Of course, it was proven she isn't operating off of pure utilitarianism. Well, that's part of how she falls short.
That's part of what broke her to a certain extent, is she's understanding and realizing, I don't follow the philosophy that I say I do.
That's right. There's a whole bunch of real world parallels here. One that came to mind for me is communism. Communism as a pure theory is beautiful. It could lead to utopia, but it would never work. You always have to have someone in charge, someone who's going to be higher than others. It's impossible for it to ever actually work. Jordo's chime in on the debate.
And that's fair.
Yeah. People who felt that it was too cheap and easy for Odium just come in with arguments and make everything crumble. And of course, then Thaylena, that they all swing over to Odium. I'm like, no, it makes sense. If she's, as the queen, has to take care of making a decision that's going to be best for her people, and she realizes, I'm going to have no ports to go to, I'm going to have no ability to trade, my people are going to suffer, or I could side with him and at least make the best deal possible. It made sense. And people are like, no, she'd never side with the evil one. It's how you define evil. It's different
and
here.
I've for a long time said Odium's not evil.
Right.
Odium is what Odium is, and a lot of our characters are opposing him, so we consider him evil. And the things he wants to do lead to a lot of bad things happening, so we consider him evil. But evil is too simple of a word, really.
Yeah, Jordo makes another good point here. Jasnah failed once she stopped trying to convince Queen Fen and instead tried to beat Odium.
Well, and that's part of where we get into a fun thing. Jasnah tried to beat Odium. That wasn't going to happen. However, Odium isn't necessarily what beat Jasnah either. Taravangian, with the mantle of Odium, was. And Taravangian won in a lot of different places with the power of Odium and really embodying some of that. But also the reason that Dalinar didn't lose, even as he loses, is because Taravangian lost, not Odium.
Well, that's where I want to say with Jasnah. Jasnah wasn't really trying to beat Odium. She was trying to beat Taravangian. And she could have beat Taravangian, except Taravangian has all of Odium's knowledge.
Has those resources.
That's why she loses. My favorite part just reading wise and enjoying was Adolin's storyline.
It was fantastic, and every time was just a fun ride, a fun little jump into filled with camaraderie and good character moments and growth, and a very different story than what we've seen throughout the Stormlight Archive, but a very fulfilling one.
They've been building up the character of Adolin throughout the book. Sanderson has done a nice job with this, I thought. And so it made sense to see Adolin as the much more self-actualized, healthy individual now, who doesn't get nearly so wrapped up in image, in having to be who he needs to be. He can just be authentic. And I thought that was an earned journey that we're seeing the result of here. And it's huge in his relationship with Yanagon. Saying that name right?
The Emperor.
I'm pulling it from memory. That I didn't have it in my note here. I thought that played really well. And then to have him there winning people over to his authenticity just by not trying to lord it over, and even being able to demonstrate that he can make the wrong call, do something the wrong way, and immediately just go and apologize. Not try to pretend it's not a big deal and get over it. No, he's such an authentically nice guy. He's always been a nice guy.
He's not perfect.
But now he's lent it into a far more powerful way that makes sense for his journey.
He's far from perfect, but he is in many ways too good for our story.
Well, and being the too good guy here, we bring in a slight element of grimdark. Poor Adolin got beat the heck up in this story. He's not the man he was anymore.
And he still had some really wild, badass moments.
Oh, like man.
Charging right through the dome and using a Parshendi as a weapon.
That's great. Two of my favorite moments for Adolin here was one, he's having to deal with the peg leg. And this is one of the criticisms the book has gotten. But in world, the book solved the problem. People just aren't accepting it. That how can he be so skilled still at managing with a peg leg that fast? No, he's not going to be on the line, even in a slight inferior manner with that on his leg. It's not going to work. And in world, they said, well, he was a duelist. And we've noticed people who were high skilled at dueling are able to manage their balance pretty quickly.
Plus, we get into that not only was he a duelist, he was more or less the best duelist.
Yeah.
Then we get into also, he's not managing super well on the line, but he doesn't really have a choice. And then we get a step further into near the end, and we get the further explanation. Well, Zahil also drilled into him, you need to be able to do this one-legged.
On one leg, yes. So he's got all those things. So in world, they've explained it, and I'm okay with that.
If you don't buy that, that's fine. That's your prerogative. I'm okay with it.
But I loved when we went that next level with, he's got this relationship with Maya, but we've seen little hints that there's something going on with the rest of his armor too, which we've learned now are actually individual spren. And when he figures out, I think by chance stumbles into figuring out, he asked his little spren, indirectly given it to someone else, and then the
Monarch.
What?
The Monarch.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't remember his full name.
Abidi the Monarch.
He defeated the other one, got the armor, so it's working for them. And when he realizes, that's because they're still doing what he said. So when he asks it basically to come back, and it does. That was a moment. Loved that. It plays into Adolin's journey.
One of the best things to see in this book, and then also that to be excited about going forward, is the Unoathed.
Yes. That moment when Maya says, I'm here, we're here to help. And he realizes, she's brought all the Deadeyes. That's who she went and got, who are waking up more and more, just like she has. And when he does that moment, he puts his arms out and all this stuff just shows up. And we have the Unoathed. That was awesome. That's the peak moment for me in this book.
Grab a helmet, grab a sword. Let's go.
That's that moment. Every one of the books has had a moment like that. That's the one in this book.
Well, and one of my favorite parts is he asked for a certain number of armor and swords, and he got it. He just forgot to count how many people he actually had. So there's a Spren piloting the armor too.
That was so awesome. So Jordan listened to the audio version of this, and yeah, I can picture Kate Redding with all of the little plate spren with Shallan every time. Shallan. I don't know how Kate Redding does it, but I have this image in my head. This is voice. It's adorable,
including the shower scene.
What's that?
It's still adorable in the shower scene.
Okay, maybe adorable isn't the right word in the shower scene. That was next level. But yeah, that was good stuff. And now we've got a new segment of shard bearers who are here in a different way. They haven't taken oaths, but we've learned in this book, oaths aren't all they're cracked up to be. Okay, so maybe this is the healthier way for this to work out now.
Well, especially because, and I think Jordo pointed it out earlier, one of the big things we learned, especially through this book, was that oaths for the sake of oaths are meaningless. They only matter as much as what they actually stand for, what it actually means. And just holding to your oath doesn't make you a good guy.
You drinking anything today?
I am. I've got a little bit of rye with a Coke.
I have
straight vodka.
No, it's carbonated. No, it's not carbonated vodka, but it is just seltzer, flavored seltzer water. That's all I'm doing today at this point. I'll have something later. Let's talk about that final challenge then. When we get to the point, Dalinar, Terravangium, Odium thingy mabob, that challenge and the reveal. It's Gavinor is my champion. That was rough. That's a rough moment for Dalinar. Because what does he do? He can't. He's not going to kill him. I mean, there are some logical points made on why maybe he should just kill him. He refuses to do that.
Yeah, but also, like, what did Dalinar expect? Because he seems like he talks like he was expecting to get to fight somebody, to fight like Moash or something. But he came to armed with a book. So was he actually coming thinking it was going to be a discussion and a debate like Jasnah got? Like, what was Dalinar really looking for and expecting?
I think he still had no clue. So he's done everything he can to be as prepared as possible. He still doesn't feel he is prepared. So he just lets it happen now, and let's see where the chips lie.
And then ultimately, partially because it's a deal and a contest that Odium has kind of been forced into, but Odium gets to dictate those terms to a certain extent. And it basically just gets to decide, hey, you thought this was going to be a conflict where you had to try to win. You don't. I'm telling you right here, right now, you just get to choose. Do you win or do you lose? But you have to deal with the consequences of whichever choice and what it takes
really,
to do
he's
that.
saying you're going to lose either way.
Yeah,
it's
because
rigged.
You either kill him and lose a lot of your progress and various things. And to a certain extent, I think that's assuming something about Dalinar's fortitude. But Dalinar does concede it. He goes, yeah, no, that would break me. Or you concede and you let him kill you, and well, I win and get to take you and use you.
And we get to a point earlier in the book where they'd already figured out there was no way Odium was going to lose. It's like no matter how this works out, Odium's going to win. That's the only reason he agreed to the challenge. He can win this way or he can win that way, but it's going to work out that he's going to be a winner here. So what Dalinar has to figure out is how to
break the game, how to beat,
not let him win as big as he wants to.
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I think it's a really stupid move followed by a really clever move.
And I think Wit's reaction to it helps us understand that. I thought that was great. When we see Wit at the end, he's back on
Scadrial.
Born Planet. Scadrial, thank you. He's back over there. When he has the revelation of understanding how brilliant what Dalinar did. Basically make it so everyone now has to pay attention to Odium. You can't just ignore him anymore.
And we got it outlined through the Adolin chapters and the Game of Towers and stuff. Earlier, we got the foreshadowing there. And it was a great moment of going, hey, it's still Terravangian enough that we can play him. He hasn't learned Odium's lesson of what it does to you if you take on more powers, if you become more powerful. And he doesn't have really the military mind. He's super clever. He can do great military things. But I doubt Taravangian is a Towers player. Just because I don't think he necessarily saw the need for it, the use of it. It's not culturally relevant to him. And so this gambit, the Sunmaker's gambit to essentially make Odium more powerful, but also release the tether, and cultivation's fleeing now. And it does partially make me wonder, what was cultivation's plan in pointing Dalinar to the past to learn? Because cultivation definitely was choosing a path of, I don't like this plan, but it's the only card I've got left. And so it's like, did cultivation have in mind that this would be what would happen? Or was cultivation hoping, okay, most of Roshar is going to get destroyed, but maybe if I can get Dalinar to pick it up, then Honor and Odium can destroy each other? Like, what was her plan?
Yeah,
either way,
I think her plan was that she believed Dalinar could become the new Honor and be able to balance out Odium again. I think that was the entirety of her plan. And Dalinar does something completely unpredictable. Nobody could have seen it coming. And that's why she's out of here. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not here for supercharged Odium. What's the new name they give him? R something.
Retribution.
What a name.
Which I love it. It's fantastic. It's this need to stick to your word and destroy those who do not. Because it described Odium earlier in the book as like the righteous anger of God. It is what it is. It's the wrathful nature. And now we get the justification. It truly is the righteous destruction. It's not just wrath.
Yeah, Jordo highlights something. This was mentioned in the book a few times. We already have a being out there that has 2 shards. Harmony. Okay, from the Mistborn, from Scadrial. But Harmony isn't completely the power of 2. I mean, it's different.
And Taravangian notes, hey, Harmony kind of useless, kind of stupid. Grabs
isn't gonna
2
hurt
opposing
anybody.
powers. But I could grab Honor, and that would be fine, because those will work together. And he's not wrong. But he's not right. It does limit him in some ways, which Odium previously, as raised, didn't want.
Yeah.
And it does make him now a target for all the other shards.
And very quickly, just a little bit, we get to see already that little conflict within Taravangian, where he's like, he knows who wants to do his Odium, but that Honor voice is, wait a second.
He's like, no.
And he has to be true. Way. He has to be true to both essences within him, or chaos will come about. So let's, as the final point I wanted to bring up, and you might still have something else you want to talk about, but before we move into a few things that others don't like in the book that I want to talk about, let's just talk about the greater Cosmere implications.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because there's some real stuff here now. What are you seeing here now? I mean, the Ghost Bloods is a big element where there's been, stuff here. We had the bit with Sahel, who's actually Vasher, and
which gets just straight said to us.
Yes.
Like, we already knew it. It gets told to us directly if we missed it.
So he's free now and can go and do whatever he wants to do and stuff. Wit is clearly now done with Roshar for now. It's time to move on to other things.
I enjoyed Nightblood pointing out that Kaladin would probably get along well with Vivenna, since he's met her and just doesn't know it.
Azure, yep.
No, there's some great Cosmere connections. For a long time, there's been this sort of understanding that, like, you don't need to read the rest of the Cosmere, but, like, the books are better if you do. There's a certain element of, okay, maybe you really will need to eventually, because it's not that it's not explained and it doesn't make sense, but you are missing pieces. This stuff with Scadrial and Wit showing up makes no sense, really, beyond, it's another planet and we know that exists. But what does that mean? Only makes sense if you've read Mistborn. And if you have read Mistborn, you know that where we end up with Wit, now going by Hoyd again, is right at the start of Era 2. The end of Wind of Truth is right at the start of Era 2.
Yeah. Now this does tie into one of the complaints. So we're jumping to a complaint already. We might as well just address it. Sanderson has for a long time said the Stormlight Archive, you can just read it and enjoy it. Yeah, if you read the rest of the Cosmere books, there'll be extra benefits you'll enjoy, but that's poppycock about Wind and Truth. If you didn't have an understanding of all this other stuff happening out there in the Cosmere, you are not getting a big chunk of what Wind and Truth is about. So I think he's now, it's just not true.
I don't think
he's read this and really get it without.
I don't think he's wrong. I do think the book's only a 3 or a 4-star without the Cosmere. With the full Cosmere, it's a 5-star for me. Because some of the reasons that I enjoy it so much are those connections, are those things, and they play an important enough role. Now, a lot of the things about shards and what's going on in the greater Cosmere is explained within the Stormlight Archive. So you don't need those other things for it to make sense. But it feels like you're not getting it fully explained. You're not fully getting that information if you haven't read the other things. It did seem like Wind and Truth was written with an assumption that you have read most other main series, at least in the Cosmere. Maybe you missed Elantris or something, but you've read Mistborn, at least the first era. You've read Warbreaker. And I think you should. But it did seem like it was written with that assumption. And that can be a little bit hard if you're viewing it as, well, I just want to read the Stormlight Archive. And I think we are getting more and more into a place where it's like, no, you have to view it as you've got these chunks of the Cosmere. In the same way that when you bring up like Shannara books, you've got a bunch of different trilogies in a bigger thing. Realm of the Elderlings. You've got different trilogies, there's a quartet in a grander story. And I do think the Cosmere is becoming more something that is interconnected enough that you do think you need it.
Speaking of the Cosmere as a whole, Jordo put down in here, Era 3 of the Cosmere is being called Ghost Bloods. So this interconnectedness is only going to heighten more and more, quite obviously. Brandon has been playing a little fast and loose with the timelines. And so we see this here at the end of this one, that Wit is now back at Scadrial for the beginning of Era 2 of Mistborn, which we've already all read if we've been staying current with things as they were published.
But there also wasn't a confirmed, hey, were these published in the right order? Like, do these take place before, after? We knew they took place about the same time, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. Some people had thought they took place in the gap between the two. That is what turns out to actually be true. But you get something a little bit funky with the time dilation of that gap now.
Well, and then a character we didn't talk about yet. I mentioned him once, Sigil.
Mm-hmm.
We see him at the end of the book. I mean, he has a Dawn Shard with him now.
Yes.
And he's in the cognitive realm. He's on a journey now. He needs to get off Roshar. He's something totally new and different for him. And he appears in one of the secret novels, secret project books.
Yeah.
But before this, you don't have any idea why he's there.
No,
it's weird.
There are people who I think could just reasonably be upset with if they read Sunlit Man and then go and read Wind and Truth, because it feels like a spoil.
It's perfect. Sunlit Man spoils some events in Wind and Truth. Wind and Truth spoils aspects of Sunlit Man.
But to me, for a certain extent, especially not knowing what I was going into, I didn't know for sure, was Sunlit Man the couple pieces that you learned there? Was it spoiling Wind and Truth, or was it spoiling stuff that's going to happen Stormlight Archive Book 10? And I just knew something was going to happen. And it didn't feel like so big or problematic that it was a problem for me. I still enjoyed some of the moments that were reveals. And to me, I got to have a fun little moment of kicking my feet and giggling, going crazy, as Nailspren is calling Szethspren an auxiliary now and stripping of his name. And I'm like, ah! Because I'd read Sunlit Man and I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I also think, and this get into some Cosmere connections and some other things, we know Sigil's going to be out and around, and he's cosmologically important, if only for the Dawn Shard, but also for other things.
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about probably the most important Radiant currently on Roshar for the sake of the Cosmere, and definitely for Roshar. Lift.
Okay. Is she
Considering
still radiant? With
one,
cultivation being gone?
yes, because the Spren were creations of, there's still pieces. Some of that may change and fade as some of that is less invested, but the initial change that was done, that she can derive Stormlight from the things she eats, I'm pretty sure that's sticking around. So there's no source of Stormlight. There's Tower Light for while you're at your
Yeah.
Ethereal, but there's no source of Stormlight.
She might
Except
still
for
be able to be
Lift, who
radiant.
can still go around and have crazy Stormlight, is ridiculously invested, as Zahil pointed out, and now is getting trained by him,
Yep.
which is huge.
Yep.
And Jordan's pointing out that it's Lifelight. I think it is technically, but it's a funky thing where regardless, it's investiture.
Yeah.
And Lift has access to it through a third method, through
Lift
some other
may be
method.
the way it can leave planet.
And
Lift
Lift has...
couldn't. They couldn't figure out a way to get this energy off planet. Well, if she can just eat.
Between growing up and getting a little bit older still in this time gap, the training she'll get with Zahil, what makes her different from other Radiants in how she can consume and create investiture, convert it rather, absolutely needs to be a major player in the second half of the Stormlight Archive.
I enjoyed over the last 2 books how she's slowly come to grips with the fact that she does need to grow up, and the fact she is maturing now, and she just, it's not a bad thing. It needs to be a good thing. She needs to embrace it, and she got there here at the end, especially as we're seeing her, really liking staring at that one guy.
Yeah, commenting on people's butts.
I was chuckling at those parts. Nightblood ate Szeth's arm.
It wasn't on purpose.
Out of control. He just can't help himself, and yet at the very end,
he managed to rein it in.
He could have reined it in a little sooner.
It's not his fault that he's made the way he is. He's serving the purpose he was created for without much guide or anything. To me, Nightblood is a textbook nature over nurture because he never got nurture. He just has nature, and
learning all these things he can do by talking to the other shard blades or honor blades. I'm like,
because he finally has someone to tell him and show him and go, hey, no, you can choose this. You can control these things. You have choice and autonomy.
Yeah.
And I think it's fantastic.
Okay.
Nightblood's been one of my favorites for a long time. That's not changing. It is unfortunate that Kaladin's missing a few fingers and Szeth's missing an arm. But hey, Szeth gained a wife, so it's fine.
Yeah, how about that? Ooh,
good for him.
At the end. Szeth gets a happy ending, as far as we can tell. 2 other major criticisms I've seen of the book. I know there are lots of little criticisms, but 2 other major ones we should talk on, and what's our take? One is that the book's just too long. That he needed an editor to work with him better. He needed to listen to editing suggestions and not just get away with, yes, Mr. Sanderson, whatever you'd want to do. Certain sections are considered too sloggy, too preachy, meandering, rather than moving along like it should have. Do you agree?
I think there's an argument to be made there. To a certain extent, I think that argument is the same one that people make about Sanderson's writing, period. It doesn't have the most beautiful of prose. It sometimes gets lost in itself. It's sometimes got pacing issues. I usually don't have issues with that. I don't have that problem with the way the text meets with me. But I also don't necessarily have the most literally trained brain. Like, I'm not going to be sitting here and doing a literary analysis of the Stormlight Archive. That's not why I read it.
Yeah.
I do think there is something to be said of, if you found it to be bloated or slow or not connected, you're valid in that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Wind and Truth is the best written book out there. However, I finished it in the basically 10 days that they had, and it's over 1,300 pages. Like, clearly it wasn't hard for me to get through. I enjoyed every second that I was reading it. So those issues didn't seem to feel like issues to me, but your experience is valid if you felt them.
Yeah, I mean, I had issues with the pacing early on, but once it started picking up, then I was good. And I've always been of the angle, if something is good, don't I want lots and lots of it? So it's okay if it's a big book, if it's a big, awesome book. That's where I'm at. Some of the people who have most, like on our channel, people who have interacted with us on my previous review of Wind and Truth, who have criticism for the pacing, for the length, are judging it against the Way of Kings and Words of Radiance and saying he was really tight and good back then and he's just lost it and the quality is not the same. And I'm like, well, I like this book better than those two. Again, I didn't like it as much as Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, but those first two I wasn't as much a fan of. That I appreciated them better on the second time.
Yeah, I think some of that comes down to personal preference, and that's okay. What I will say is that I do think Sanderson at times in this book got a little too in love with what he was doing, which isn't usually a bad thing. But there were moments where fun, snarky moments of dialogue that I enjoyed and felt like Sanderson writing it and felt like something I would say, but didn't fit the character.
And especially when the big criticism he gets, he does humor bad.
If Kaladin makes a fun, snarky comment, it doesn't feel very Kaladin. Like Kaladin is a sometimes funny guy, but not necessarily in that way. Kaladin doesn't speak in the same way Wit does. So when a Wit line comes out of Kaladin, it feels a little weird and more like Sanderson really wanted someone to say this because he thought it was fun, and I enjoyed what was said, but it didn't match the character's vibe.
Yeah, I'm throwing in one more thing that just came to mind before we talk about the last issue I've really seen raised and hammered. But Moash, we really didn't get much out of Moash in this. He played a role, yes, but I mean he's a changed Moash now. We know that,
Two things. One, Moash was underutilized in this book purely because the person who was using him didn't exist anymore. Moash was Ray's tool, and now Taravangian's Odium. But two, I think to a certain extent, Sanderson held him a little in reserve. Got some cool moments in the Shattered Plains. Unfortunately, killed some characters here and there. Sad moments. But also, therefore, is held to be used in the second half.
Yep, which is totally what Jordo is agreeing with.
And I want Moash, as wild as it is, and as much as people would probably be upset with me for wanting this, I want the Moash redemption arc. But it was way too soon to be able to get it in this book.
Moash, though, in this book is another piece of evidence where I say you don't enjoy this book like you should if you don't know the rest of the Cosmere. Because what they did to Moash here makes no sense. There's no in Roshar connection that explains what happened to Moash. None. You have to have read Mistborn to understand what happened there with Moash.
Now, things are a little different than how it's done in Mistborn, but you are right in that it makes more sense. The closest thing is we already have seen people with like spikes through their eyes and stuff to a certain extent because we've seen Thydakar.
But they were from off-world. Mm-hmm. We could just accept things are different elsewhere somehow. Now
it's like there's a mechanic that works here with this that can be done on Roshar too. Well, what does this mean? And it matters and means a lot more if we know about Steel Inquisitors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, the last criticism. People are saying really cheap character work here. Again, we've touched on some of these, how Kaladin just stumbles into how to finally help Szeth, Nail, and Ashar with a flute and with the wind, which has never been a deal before. Suddenly this book, the wind. I mean, they try to suggest the wind has been part of Kaladin's story all along. Feels a little, what's the word I want? Revisionist history. with the wind here now. And again, the arguments about Adolin and pulling off the peg leg thing, and although that was cool when his armor figures out how to work around it, I thought that was fun.
But I loved the wind, but even further than that, the stone and getting multiple pieces, that there are stone, the night, the wind, that there are these original kind of big spren entities of Adonalsium. Because we already did have established that Roshar wasn't made by the shards that were invested in it. This was Adonalsium's thing. And this is where the spren already existed. We just got extra special spren, and we see the process, and we learn more about that in the spiritual realm and the visions here. And so it to me is like, no. The story we're getting on the Stormlight Archive is bigger than the shards who were on Roshar, because Roshar was there first.
Okay.
And I think the pieces were there for some of that. We just didn't necessarily expect or were looking for them. I think that will continue to build to even bigger payoffs and points later. And any characters who really had work that development that felt cheap or not enough in this book, for the most part, not all of them, but most of them, I stand by. I think it was payoffs of 4 books and multiple years of development.
People are ignoring that or missing some of the journey.
It's like, maybe we didn't get all of the development in this book, but this book took place over 10 days.
And Jordo is pointing this out, and this is another part of the criticism, though he's not using it for this way, saying the revelation of the old gods isn't late, it's just early setup for the back half. There are people who feel like this book spent too much energy setting things up for the next arc, and instead of finishing this arc as well as they could have. I think it did both okay. I didn't have that problem, but that is one of the criticisms that I'm seeing common.
I think people with that opinion had the wrong expectation coming into the book. I said it at the beginning of this episode, and I'll say it again. Yes, this is the end of arc 1. It's book 5 of 10. We're in the middle of the series. We've got a lot to go. Of course, we want to set things up moving forward. I would be disappointed if I didn't feel like I had places to go. If this felt like an end, I would probably be more upset because I know there's more coming. If I didn't know that, maybe I'd be happy. Maybe I'd be okay with it being a 5-book series and hope for another trilogy or another series that tells a different story. But we're right in the middle of the same story still. It's just a different path and part of it.
Okay. Any other items to discuss? We're just about hitting an hour and a half here. I think we've done a pretty good job of catching everything that was on the big radar here. But anything else come to mind for you, Zach?
I think I just want to throw out, at the end of the day, I'm aware, I'm biased. I very much enjoy this book and the series. I hope I'm not getting so far as to being an apologist, but I will defend parts of it while acknowledging you're still valid if you find flaws or things that you don't like about it. Not everyone needs to love every book that I love. I'm going to continue to like this one, though.
Well, there you go. Okay. Yeah. Was it as good as I was hoping it would be? Nah. But do I regret reading it? Not at all. I still enjoyed the story, and a lot of it was very satisfying. And parts of it were quite entertaining. So,
do I wish that we were getting the next book in fewer than 10 years? Yeah. But also,
7 years.
I fully expect that when we get a Ghostbloods trilogy or something in between, that it will have ramifications that connect and I'm going to enjoy. And for me, I'm not waiting 7 years for the next book in the series. I'm waiting a year or 2 for the next Cosmere book.
Well, and that may be where we can now rest and enjoy that every one of the books of the Cosmere is telling very clearly more of the meta story. It's not going to be, let's stop doing the isolated chunks. Okay. Let's tell the bigger story and understand that with every book that comes out. And then we have stuff to enjoy. And I think that's kind of his intention now. That's why he can say 2031 for the next Stormlight, because he's got, and it's on his website, he's got all these books planned and they're all part of the Cosmere story he's telling.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like he's going to wait a few years before doing another one. No, he's going to be busy with the other pieces that have to be put in place before he can move on to the next Stormlight. I will say he's ambitious, though. If he's intending to retire at a typical age, that's about when his last Stormlight Archive book's going to come out, as he hits around 65, 67.
I don't think he's planning to. I think he's going to write until he's written everything he wanted to write. To a certain extent, this is the guy I think who is going to write until he dies. Not because he has to, but because he wants to.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the timeline he's laid out here. He's got a good 20 years of writing ahead of him planned out already, which is, okay, goal-oriented. It's a career. I may not make it to read all of his books. We'll just see what happens.
I will.
I'm not that much older than him, but he's not that much younger than me, is what I've learned. He's late 40s, but yeah, Stephen King is probably the nearest parallel I have to him with some big old Cosmere type thing. There's the King verse. He's got so many books that are interconnected over time, all of them tied through his Dark Tower fantasy series. Almost everything he writes has a connection to it. And he's still in his 70s pumping out at least
he's
a
still
book
writing,
a year, and they're all still interconnected. So Jordo dropped something here. A recent Q&A, he was asked if he planned for an emergency, a la Robert Jordan. He said yes. Well, that's nice.
I love and appreciate that.
Yes.
Looking at you, George R.R. Martin, who said you would absolutely not do that.
George, man, what a putz.
We aren't owed anything. I know, but we want it.
Before we get lost on any other tangents, this is probably a good time to wrap up. Jordo, thanks for joining us today. You enriched the conversation. We appreciate your support. And any of you want to, join us for things like this in the future, we're going to be aiming at doing more of these episodes when Zach and I come together on something as live for our Patreon supporters. So check it out. It's down in the show notes how you can become a patron and see the raw footage, the behind the scenes before then I download it, edit, and put it back up for everybody else. It's been fun. It's been real. It's even been real fun, Zach. So thanks for the time. And everybody, we'll talk to you next time.